And it wasn't until my brother's facility got raided by the regime, where we were extorted, we were chased out of the country. He had to literally bolt it to the border at night with his 2 kids because they were extorting him, telling him they were going to come after him and his family if they didn't give up his equipment and pay them another $25,000 on some made-up charges. So in Venezuela, the thing with hyperinflationary countries is not just hyperinflationary countries. The problem with countries that have big divides amongst the people that have assets and don't have assets is that you are either, in those societies, you're either a nail or you're a hammer.
Hey man, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Jordan. Thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. It's good to see you again.
Likewise. It's been a very fun few months here in this industry.
Yeah. It's always a roller coaster. Always new things, because we only talked like 4 weeks ago, but there's been so much happening since then. Okay, let's start off with looking at your background. So the way I want to frame this is that in the UK that we complain a lot about inflation. Well, in the UK we just complain a lot in general. But you grew up in Venezuela, where it makes our inflation rates look minuscule. What was this like?
It's a great question. And what hyperinflation feels like. So maybe I'll start by making a distinction between inflation and hyperinflation. And maybe this will start making more sense. The rest of the story will make more sense when I lay these two things out.
Yeah.
Inflation, as you and I know it, or as most people in OECD countries or a handful of countries with stable currencies know it, is an economic phenomenon. It is a rational increase of prices of goods and services driven by an increase in the money supply. So this is very simply put, if you increase the money supply by 30% in a year and the asset base of your economy remains the same, what's going to happen is that the assets and services within your economy are going to get repriced to reflect the 30% of new money units in the economy. An example of this is Canada and the US famously printed about 30 to 40% of their money supply during 2020, during the years of COVID. And then, surprise, surprise, assets, stocks, and everything goes up by 30%. So that is inflation. Inflation is a rational response to an increase in the money supply. An investor sees the money supply increasing. They know assets don't increase that fast. So they reprice their assets. Completely normal. Hyperinflation is an emotional response to the failure of a particular system. And basically what it means is it's the equivalent of a liquidation of the currency. The way hyperinflation gets triggered, and I believe I'll have to go back and check ChatGPT after this, but to my knowledge, most hyperinflationary periods have been driven by political disruption, coup d'etats, governments falling, dictators getting installed. That's what triggers hyperinflation, because hyperinflation is no longer rational. Hyperinflation is when you believe that the government has lost all ability to control the train and that the government is basically an antagonist to you as a private citizen. So the way this happens, or the way this works, during an inflationary period, you have an asset, 30% of the money supply has been printed. You will ask for 30% more for your assets, but you won't be rushing to get rid of the asset, right? When hyperinflation comes, what's happening is the price of your goods in bolívares, so the Venezuelan currency, is nominally going up. What's dropping like a fly is the exchange rate between your bolívares and the dollar, or your bolívares and anything that actually has a tether to some type of value, right? So yes, you're going up in bolívares, but in real terms, in dollar terms and gold terms and oil terms and Bitcoin terms, all of your assets are just collapsing in value. So what you're doing, even though the asset is going up in bolívares, you are going out and you are force liquidating the asset. You will take whatever anyone on the other side will give you, because you know the other person buying it is a lunatic. Like nobody should be buying anything in this environment, yet somebody shows up with a bid, and even if it's 50% below what you think it's worth, you get rid of it. And the same thing goes for the currency. If you have a currency that's getting hyperinflated away, and the government won't deal you the dollars, because the first thing a government does in hyperinflation is they basically shut down the exits. They make buying dollars illegal. And so then you're forced out into the open market. And in the open market, people will offer you whatever they want, right? And you will have to make the decision. So do I take 50% of what I think it's worth? Or do I wait until tomorrow when it's going to be worth half of what's today? Or do I wait until the next day when it's worth half of that? And so because there's no economic thing that you could look at, like, oh, the supply increased by this much, therefore the new value should be this. There is no anchor to what value is. Value becomes what the other person gives you. And there are not that many people offering you anything. So you are just forced liquidating and forced selling everything. So I'll give you an example of what this plays out like in the daily life of a person. Okay, you complain about inflation in the UK. You get paid on a Friday. What do you do? What is your immediate response after you get paid on a Friday? Probably nothing, right?
Nothing.
You just get paid. You look at your bank account. You're like, oh, that's great. I'll have to pay my bills, and my rent's not going up too much next month, and my grocery bill's not going up too much next month. Oh, not too bad, right? When you get paid in hyperinflation, you get paid on a Friday. And you get paid on a Friday in Venezuela at 3 p.m. typically is when you got paid. Banks in Venezuela typically close at 4. So what ends up happening in hyperinflation is you get paid at 3. The second you see the transaction hit your bank account, you run out of your desk and you rush to the bank and you line up to withdraw cash or to basically send that cash to someone else to pay for dollars or to pay for food or to pay for rent, because your food and your rent are getting repriced daily. And so the longer you wait to pay for these things, the less of them you can consume. So hyperinflation forces you to have 2 jobs. It forces you to have the job through which you make your money, and then it forces you to the second job is to get rid of the money you get paid immediately. And that is a full-time job, because if you got paid on Friday, you waited till Monday, and the value of the currency dropped 40 to 60% over the weekend, that means you cannot afford the same things you afforded last month. Your life is 50% shittier now. And that cycle continues and continues and continues. And so it doesn't even matter how hard you work in your real job. If you don't do a good job at getting rid of your currency, you're falling behind just like anyone else that didn't work. And so it's very nefarious. And another thing that happens in hyperinflation, which is a quirk that many people don't really think is an issue. So you know how bank limits are set on large value transactions? So like you can only withdraw $1,000. You can only transfer Jordan $1,000 a month. You can only pay this store up to $3,000. What do you think happens when the value of your currency is halving every day? The limit for me to withdraw from an ATM, I can sit in an ATM, I could withdraw 5 times. The total dollar value that I would withdraw from that ATM would be $5. The limit on my credit card, maxing out my credit card at a store, could be $15. Because that number in bolívares used to be 3,000. But over the last 3 months, it became the equivalent of $15. So what ends up happening is all digital payment methods become obsolete.
Yeah.
Because you cannot go to a bank and withdraw $5. What do you pay for? And you have stacks of cash that are, the size of from my waist up, and that is the total grand total of $20. So you will be paying for breakfast. You'll be paying with stacks of cash this big, because your credit card gets maxed. And so this is living in inflation. And the sad part about it is that those who get this concept that I just broke down for you, the fact that you need to have 2 jobs, a lot of people don't get there. a lot of people just don't get there because they're trying to figure out why they're not making, why are they worse off? So they turn on the TV. And what the TV says is, oh, it's not us that are printing the money. We're not debasing you. It's the greedy corporations that are repricing their goods and services. It's the greedy corporations. And so then they go to the greedy corporation and they'll ask, hey, why are you guys increasing the prices? And the corporation will say, well, because everything costs more now. We don't get dollars from the government. This exchange rate that they're telling you exists, we don't get it. We have to go and buy open market dollars, just like you. And basically their goods get repriced. The option is we either sell them at the price that we need to keep the lights on, or the goods go away. And what ends up happening is public pressure and the gaslighting from the media basically leads the government to say, oh, the greedy corporations. What happened in Venezuela was people started complaining that chicken got expensive and that meat got expensive. And so Chavez goes out on TV and says, chicken's too expensive. Beef is too expensive. I'm going to regulate the price of beef. I'm going to regulate the price of chicken. So chicken is going to be $2 a pound and beef's going to be $3 a pound. And whoever sells it at a different price, you're going to come see me. So instantly, the private producers of these things, they get together on this sort of industry group and they request a meeting. And they say, guys, and they say, Mr. Government, we can't produce at these prices. I will show you my math. Like it doesn't add up. And Chavez goes and says, you can't do it, but I can. I'll take over the factory. I'll empower the workers. I'll empower all of the workers to take over your facility. And at the beginning, the empresarios were like, well, hold on. Like this is our life's work. Like you can't just take it. We've been doing this for a living. These guys won't know how to operate this thing. Like this not going to play out like you think. And then the government said, and then they had this sort of standoff where the producers went and they legitimately tried to make the prices be what the government wanted them to be. Clearly that wasn't working. So eventually the guys got so tired that they said, you know what, man, give me whatever you're gonna give me. This is how we get into this hyperinflation thing. It's like, you know what? I thought this plant was worth this many $1 million. I thought this was gonna be worth this much because of future. I see now that if I don't take whatever you're giving me now, I'm gonna get nothing tomorrow. So you know what? Have at it. Give me whatever you can give me. Expropriate me. Take the keys. Empower the workers. Go do it. And they did. And so Chavez takes over the factories and goes, yeah, they have these big events. The factory workers all clapping. It's like, yeah, we got it. And then they go out and try to produce the chicken. What do you think happened, Jordan?
It didn't end well.
Chicken disappeared. Chicken just disappeared from the shelves, and so did beef. Okay? And then people start complaining about that there is no chicken. Before it was like the chicken was expensive. Then it got regulated. Then it disappeared. So then people said, whoa, wait a second. We want chicken. What happened to the chicken, Chavez? And Chavez goes, you know what? Don't worry about it. While we figure it out here, I'm just going to subsidize importing chicken. And so I'm going to pay people dollars so they can bring in chicken and it will stock the shelves. So then the guys importing the chicken in the type of scam. Imagine now if you're finding out these excesses and wasteful expenses that are happening at USAID, which is a public, open, US transparent government body. And they were doing funny business. What do you think the type of business who do you think the type of people were that were getting awarded these preferential dollar rates to bring in chicken? Who do you think these people were? The bottom of the barrel of Venezuelan scammers and opportunists, right? But along they come and they start getting these, they start telling the government, we're going to bring chicken that's $5 a pound. Therefore, we're going to need $20 million. And the government goes, here's $20 million. In fact, they end up bringing $1 million worth of chicken. And it's crappy parts, it's old and it's busted, but they bring it. So they're bringing it. So chicken shows up back on the shelf. So everybody's like, yay, Chavez, chicken's here, it's cheap, let's go, baby. So the guys that were here trying to sort out the producing of the chicken at the fair prices see over here that the guys that are just bringing the chicken are making a lot more money. So they look at their factories and they're like, nah, forget the factory. Let's just import the chicken like these guys are doing. So that happened to chicken. That happened to beef. that happened to beans, that happened to rice, that happened to all, basically everything, shoes, like everything. You were better off flipping the currencies and basically trying to figure out a way of making a premium on the importation than the actual manufacturing. So slowly it dismantles the Venezuelan productive apparatus. Anyone that used to build anything is no longer building anything. Everybody has become an importer and a de facto speculator of government contracts. And that works while the government has a massive inflow of oil revenues that they don't have to pay for, that just magically pops off the ground. But believe it or not, the Chavez regime was able to, because this is a feat of just mismanagement. I don't think anyone's mismanaged something this badly, but I'm willing to be corrected. When Chavez took office, Venezuela was producing 3.5 million barrels of oil per day. This is 2000, the year 2000. In 24 years, with massive technology advancements, how much do you think Venezuela is producing today?
Similar?
Less than 600,000 barrels per day.
Oh,
so what ends up happening is that through the decimation of the production capacity out of your own negligence, then tack on some sanctions and some restrictions because the free world is opening their eyes and realizing you're a freaking tyrant. And now all of a sudden, the gravy train has stopped. You have no oil. You have no one to squeeze for anything anymore because they're all gone and you've already squeezed every little bit of juice out of that orange. So now you're sitting here with a broken economy, restrictions to deal with people in different parts of the world because you're a tyrant, and no money and no food. So what do? There will be discontent. People start getting mad. Yeah. People start calling for elections. What do? You can decide to hold an election, potentially lose, or you can bring out the guns, you can shoot down the protesters, and you can say, if you don't like it, get out. And that's actually what happened in Venezuela. An election came up when Chavez died. Everyone thought we were going to get the country back. Mm-hmm. The Maduro regime knew that if they lost, they would go on a plane straight to The Hague and just go jailed for life. So what do? They said, no, we didn't lose. We won. And like, wait a second, but let's do the recount. Nah, we're good. We won. And then all of us are like, okay, well, this isn't right. This isn't fair. Where's the reasoning? Like, where's fairness? And then you quickly learn that this idea that someone's going to come save you is just in the movies. No one's going to come save you. A lot of Venezuelans are still waiting for some type of marine operation to go in and just swat down Maduro, and then the world will thrive again. What actually happened was Maduro, the international community was like, oh no, please, Maduro, you can't be this mean. You got to do the election again. Maduro said, no, actually, we don't. What are you going to do about it? And, oh, well, we're going to sanction you. We're going to that. They didn't. They went in. They did a concert. They brought Richard Branson and Shakira to dance at the border. But then everyone forgot about us. And so, man, that was a long answer. But yeah, that's what living in hyperinflation is like.
That's crazy. And I was just looking up there. I was trying to bring up a picture of, it was, what's it called here? I think it's survival. Anyway, there's a graphic of scenario A and scenario B. In scenario A, you've got an island with someone on it, and and it's a deserted island, they use the sticks from the trees to write help in the sand. And then scenario B, the person had used the sticks from the trees to build a raft to get off of the island. And that's exactly what that reminded me of, is no, you shouldn't rely on the governments, especially in this scenario, to save you from this. It's about taking ownership and educating yourself around what is actually happening here. how long did it take you to realize? Because obviously you've realized how it works, but a lot of people probably don't, as you said. How long did it take you to actually realize what was happening here?
Well, the understanding of what was happening came first. It was clear that Venezuela was being mismanaged, and it was clear from very early on that the plans for that Chavez and the Communist Party had for the country were just going to lead us in a bad direction. What takes longer is to figure out what to do about it, right? Because I was very privileged in that I had a second passport. I had an Italian passport that allowed me to come to Canada and do my schooling in Canada. My family was relatively, middle class. They could afford to send me abroad. I could afford to have time to think about what I wanted to do. Not very many people have that. Most people have to have a 9-to-5 to keep the lights on. You don't have time when you're on a 9-to-5 to wax poetic and think about macroeconomics and the long-term fate, or make as good of a decision as you would if you had the time. So in my case, I was very privileged and lucky because I knew things were bad. So I wanted to do my university in not Venezuela. So I forced myself to leave the country to go university. Not everyone did that. But as I was spending more time abroad doing university, doing my schooling, and I saw how the country just continued to sink, it became very clear. And it was to the point where I could see it because I was outside. But even my own family couldn't see it. For the longest time, I was begging them to leave. And they were actually doing the opposite. They were begging me to come back. And they saw this. We lived in the same hyperinflationary country. The whole thing was, we both saw a lot of the same. But even within our family, we were coming at odds with the view about what was going to happen to the country. And they found Bitcoin in 2015. My family finds Bitcoin in the middle of hyperinflation.
Oh.
And ironically, the reason they find Bitcoin is because of my youngest brother's reluctance to leave. My brother didn't want to leave the country. My dad wanted him to go to school abroad like I had, or to finish, or just to do his master's abroad. He had just finished university. But my brother didn't want to leave. He kept insisting in finding a business to stay in Venezuela. And my dad kept rejecting everything because my dad was going to be the angel funding his first venture. And they come to this furious debate at the end because my brother really wanted to do this Bitcoin mining thing. And my dad didn't understand it. So my dad's like, I don't know what you're doing. And so my brother's like, listen, if you don't support this, I'm leaving the house. I don't really care. I've made my mind. You can either be in it or I'll just go and do it anyway. And so my dad sends me the white paper one night and goes, hey, your brother seems pretty intense about this thing. Can you take a look? And so I took a look. I didn't get the aha moment, but I said, sure, go mine. They start mining and they start doing really, really well. And we start helping other people mine. And I start trying to build my own rigs here in Canada, visiting Venezuela and trying to set up my own rigs there and their facilities, just like sneaking them in. And slowly I realized what Bitcoin does and what it is. And I see it's a lifeline for us as a family. And I think to myself immediately, everyone else is going to need this eventually. This is what we need to be building. We need to stay in this industry. We found gold here. We need to devote our lives into this. And I know I cannot build a sustainable business in Venezuela. Let's get out. Let's try to build something sustainable abroad. And my family is still, at the time, was like, no, Mauri, mining here is great. We're just going to keep this going. Don't worry about it. The energy is super cheap here. We don't have the same margins abroad. I'm like, it's not about the margins. It's about what's going to happen in 5 years. You're going to do much better if you do something sustainable that some guy with a crazy view and a sombrero can't take off from you with a pen swap. And they still weren't as gung-ho about leaving as I was, because I was already gone. Yeah. It wasn't until my brother's...
What year was this?
This is 2016.
Okay.
2016, 2017. And it wasn't until my brother's facility got raided by the regime.
Oh, wow.
Where we were extorted, we were chased out of the country. He had to literally bolt it to the border at night with his 2 kids because they were extorting him, telling him they were going to come after him and his family if they didn't give up his equipment and pay them another $25,000 on some made up charges. So in Venezuela, the thing with hyperinflationary countries is it's not just hyperinflationary countries. The problem with countries that have big divides amongst the people that have assets and don't have assets is that you are either, in those societies, you're either a nail or you're a hammer. When you're a hammer, it's beautiful. You get everything you want. You pay pennies on the dollar for anything else. You call up all your friends and the authorities. You're virtually untouchable. It's all great. And most people in these types of countries operate as either nails or hammers. In the case of my family, for a while, for that last little bit, we operated in the hammer camp, I would say. We had the means to get, to solve problems and didn't really get into a lot of problems because we had a good reputation. So we were in the hammer camp. Overnight, you turn into a nail. And when you turn into a nail, the hammers don't want to help you no more because they know the other hammers are after you.
Yeah.
So when they raided my facility, we started calling all of our hammer friends. We're like, hey, we have this happening. Can you help us? Can you help us? Not only were they telling us, no, we can't, but no, we can't, click, ignore, 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 right? Like, I don't want to be close to this because they are now in nail camp.
Yeah.
And so the second that happened, my family switch flipped to understanding that they made a mistake by staying there for so long. And not only that, but they can now not go back. And so my family hasn't been back in God knows how long. They raided our facility on January of 2018. So call it 7 years. We haven't been back.
Wow. Wow. Was it? So I'm guessing, was it because of Bitcoin that they came in and raided? Because obviously at this point, run up of 2017, like I remember that, and life was like, nobody could believe what Bitcoin was doing. And then we had the monster crash in early 2018. But was it because of the Bitcoin elements and you were mining this asset that they came after you?
Absolutely. It was because we had been one of the first miners to, help people how to mine and tell people what to do. We were one of the first miners in our town, I would argue in the country. So when people came and saw what we were doing, everybody had the same question. How do you do it? How can I do it? Can you help me? And so we started helping a lot of people. So people knew of us as the miner family. We were the Bitcoin family back home. At that time, we didn't, for us, helping others went beyond our OPSEC at the time, which is, we were happy. We just didn't know. I think even none of us predicted how big this thing was going to become, right? So that was why they raided our facilities, because we were mining, because they wanted to make an example of honest miners. And if you combine the story I told you before and this one, in 2017, Maduro is basically sanctioned to the nth degree. Oil production has been decimated. He's got nowhere to go. Inflation is in the millions %. Any dollar he prints is getting mirrored right back at him. So he's really stuck, especially because of US sanctions. And then he finds that there's this thing called Bitcoin that cannot be stopped and that cannot be sanctioned. And he has this great idea. He creates this Venezuela crypto called the Petro, which was the biggest scam. I have an article if you want to read it. It's called The Petro's a Scam. Here's why. It's pretty self-explanatory. But Maduro he thinks, okay, this is going to be my mirrors for gold scheme. I'm gonna try to get people's Bitcoin and I'm going to offer them in exchange this crappy freaking Petro thing that I'm going to say it's backed by some Venezuelan oil or whatever. If you look at the fine print, which no one did, it was an instrument to scam people out of their Bitcoin, like straight up. So first idea is, okay, let's see if people are dumb enough to trade me their Bitcoin for Petros. Mm-hmm. They weren't. Narrator, they were not. People saw right through it. They didn't get a single Bitcoin out of it. Then he says, okay, how about I go find the people that are getting Bitcoin in the country here. I've seen from the import records that there's these machines that are getting brought in, and apparently they are used to mine Bitcoin. So I'm going to create a registry of Bitcoin miners, and I'm going to politely ask everyone in the country to register. What do you think happened? Of course, no one registers. You're doing it to basically get out of this thing. So no one's going to register, and the ones who do are either in cahoots with the regime, or they're their buddies, because everyone knows they're not going to have good intentions coming out of this registry. Now, that said, even though the Petro scheme failed and his registry got no uptake, he started doing these road shows around the country. And in the road shows, he would parade around these ASICs, GPU rigs, and Bitcoin ASICs, S5s, S7s, S9s, I think. And he was parading them around. And keep in mind, this was a roadshow to promote the Petro. But the Petro was never a proof of work coin. It was never supposed to be mined. So he was parading these ASICs around, and he would spend an awful lot of time on these events around the ASICs. He was basically demonstrating, like, this ASIC could make $400 a day. This ASIC sounds like this. This ASIC looks like this. This is the heat print of the ASIC. This is the energy print of the ASIC. And what he was doing, this roadshow had a very nefarious agenda. What he was really doing was telling all of his cronies, this is what a miner looks like. This is how much it can make for you. This is where you plug it, and this is how you find them. This is how you find them through a heat sensor. This is how you find them through an energy measurement device. This is how you get clues on who's using them. Surprise, surprise. Right after the roadshow finished, my friends and my family started reporting these strange visitors in their facilities, dressed as utilities, dressed as municipal reps, and they were asking things like, oh, we noticed you had an upgrade in the energy consumption here. Just wanted to double check what type of activity you're doing, because there's an awful lot of energy. And then the municipal guy was saying, oh, I just wanted to understand what kind of business you're operating out of this site. The site is, permits this types of uses. We are curious to hear, if you've changed or updated your uses. And then those went from questions to outright extortions and threats, and then stealing of the equipment. So people come in, they say, I'll take the equipment or else. What are my charges? No charges. Here's your gun. Take it or leave it. Give me the equipment. And my friends were like, yeah, just take it. No worries. You're not going to stand on the wedge. Just take your equipment. And then they start calling us and letting us know, hey, these things are happening. And for me, it was par for the course. Like it was not a shock to me. But what it was, but for me, it was like, I basically started telling my family, like, it won't be long until we are having the same issues. Literally not a week went by and my brother's facility got raided. And that basically ended, that witch hunt really ended the hobby miner wave that we saw in Venezuela. Because from there on out, the only people who could continue to mine were the people that were in the repository. So basically they took our machines and they went in and basically said, oh, we're going to do them. And we're parties with, I'm General Rodriguez. I'm General Jimenez, Army General this, Army General that. And these are the guys that are mining in Venezuela, or were mining back then. Today, the mining activity has completely stopped because even their own governing body got so corrupt that they went after each other. It was like a cancer. And so they canceled this thing, and it's now being investigated for corruption because apparently the Venezuelan crypto regulator has mismanaged, I don't know, something like $10 billion that nobody can find. So, yeah, I mean, I don't really remember where the rant started, but I'll end it there for now.
I heard that story. That's insane. Just the amount of corruption, and it's actually scary to hear because you think about these things. Well, for me, living in the UK, there's a lot of this could happen or this might happen. And so then to hear an actual story of this did happen and I've experienced it is really scary.
Oh, can I tell you something?
Yeah.
So when this whole Chavez thing was starting, one of the funniest, well, not funniest, one of the most vivid memories I have was when Chavez got into office in 2001, my family and others moved to Florida to spend some time in Florida because most people, or a lot of people, thought he was going to be a one-term affair. Like he was going to be in and out and the country was going to come back to the rails. And I remember there were a lot of Cubans in Miami, a lot of our Cuban friends. And I had a lot of friends who were Cuban. And we would tell them about what was happening in Venezuela. And the response was, oh, sweetie, we used to think that it would never happen to us. We used to say the things that you're saying right now. It's like, I would recommend you think about a permanent move. I would recommend that you forget about this idea of going back to the country. I would just, it's just going to be easier for you. And then I used to say back, I would snap back. It's like, no way. We're oil-rich country. This can't happen to us. We're civilized. We're this. This guy is not going to be able to do it. And they would always just very calmly would say, oh, sweetie, I get it. I know it's hard. But if I were you, I would be considering, the possibility that you may never go back and that the country may never return to democracy. And we were like, oh, outrageous. Impossible. No way. Not here. Not this. Not to us. Man, were they right. And I see things happening in places like the UK. I see things happening in Europe. I see things happening in Canada. It's a slow motion train wreck. It's the exact same things. And I say to people jokingly, half jokingly, I wish I was joking, but I'm not. I say, and this is a phrase I got from my dad. It says, Venezuelans come from the future. Act accordingly. Because what happened to Venezuelans, we would argue that people in Weimar Republic came from the future. We could argue that people in Zimbabwe came from the future. So all of us are human. We are living on this human manages money and thus so responsibly world. Never plays out.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I would say to the people in Europe listening to this, Canada listening to this, all these countries where, the sirens of free things are, chanting louder and louder all the time. And those who believe that this cannot happen to you, this could not be happening to us, it can, and it will. And the best things you can do is to be prepared. And I'm not trying to be doomsday here or get anyone spooked, but you should be prepared for a scenario where someone or somewhere in the government mismanages things and you might have to pay for that. So I am a big proponent of having a second passport. I've always said this to everyone, preferably not from a neighboring country. Don't do that. And I would always tell people, have an offshore bank account, have some Bitcoin, just have some diversification as far as your asset base and have some hedges as far as your home base, because things can change on you. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would be 40 and telling you the country that I grew up in is gone. Never in my wildest dreams. We were the richest country in Latin America growing up.
Wow.
One of the biggest powerhouses in oil production in the world. It's gone. So
yeah, and I could see, like, I don't want to think about it, but it's like in the future, the direction that the UK is going currently is like, I could see something like this happening. I don't like to think about that, but you have to. And it's like, how faster countries are bleeding faster than others is how I like to think about it. And
yes.
And in the UK, it's just a lot slower, although that's kind of speeding up a little bit at the moment. I don't want to get into that side of it too much, but yeah, that's why Bitcoin is so brilliant, is people who are into it are not now tied to that country that you're in. Previously, I would have probably had a property, and I would have had to sell up that property. But probably at the same time, if I wanted to get out of the country, I would have to sell it up. But at the same time, lots of people would have also been trying to sell at the same time. So you would have no buyers.
That's what I mentioned in the beginning. Yes.
Exactly. And it's like everybody running to the bank on the Friday, essentially. And that's what would happen before. But now we've got this thing that I can leave the country tomorrow, and I can take it with me. And I've got this asset, or this form of money that I can take wherever I want to go, whenever I want to go, and I can sell it whenever I want to sell it because there is global demand for it. It's not just this little suburb in London that someone wants to move to. And
Correct.
this is the brilliant thing, and it must have been getting to a question for you because you were mining in Venezuela. Yes, it got raided, all the miners, but I assume you would have had some Bitcoin that you could have left the country with.
That's how my brother left. That's what allowed him to leave. They took the ASICs, but they could never touch the Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And to tie two of the points that you made around the usability of Bitcoin, 100% agree with you. I would say arguably better than selling it is to use it as a collateral for a loan, because that way you get to keep it and you get to use it, and that's what we do. But that idea came from a bunch of other. But that idea came from us being tired of selling our Bitcoin to grow our mines, and we couldn't believe nobody was lending against it. We thought, to your point, and everybody wants it. It could be. It trades 24/7. And today, one of the beautiful things about our business is that I can take your Bitcoin out of the UK and I can issue you a loan. I can take Maria's Bitcoin out of Madrid, issue her a loan. I can take Steven's Bitcoin out of Florida, issue him a loan. All of you are going to get the same rate. And no financial entity in the world and no other asset class in the world can allow that or can do that.
Yeah.
And so that was one of the biggest things for me as far as when I saw the potential of this thing. To your point, lending against a house in the UK is very different than lending against a house in the US, lending against a house in Colombia. Lending against gold locked in a vault in Venezuela is very different than lending against gold locked in a vault in Switzerland. So even gold doesn't have that. Try to settle a gold payment between a counterparty in Europe and one in Africa. What, you got to get ships, armored trucks, and cars? Bitcoin, we can do that like this. So it's just so far superior, a far superior form of collateral and just a reserve asset that is just miles ahead of gold. And because of the things that you just mentioned, it's basically just as good as gold from a sort of stock to flow inflation ratio. It's better, I would argue. And you can do many, many more things. It's digital. Imagine trying to leave Venezuela with a kilo of gold.
Yeah.
Seriously, imagine trying. No, but seriously, you can't.
Well, yeah. What would you do?
So you can't. What are you gonna do? Are you gonna drive out your cars too? That doesn't work. And again, Bitcoin is this thing that most people don't think they would ever need it. And it's because of its nature and because of the extreme cases in which it shows its true highest value.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very extreme case, what I just mentioned to you. Not a lot of people are getting raided and chased and prosecuted and witch hunted by their regimes. That's a very finite use case.
Mm-hmm.
So Bitcoin, you don't need it. Most people don't need it until it's the only thing you need.
Mm-hmm.
And you need anything else. And so there's this binary of extremes. So what I would say to people today, even if you don't think you need it, even if you think I'm being crazy and I'm too extreme by even comparing these two things, fair. You don't have to do what I did. You haven't gone through the same life experiences that I have. But as someone who's been through good times, bad times, never thought we were going to get the bad times. I don't know how many people alive today have seen a country that was a superpower in the region become the laughingstock of the world. I don't know how many people have. In my lifetime, I don't think there's been a more dramatic and sad example than Venezuela. Yes, it could be an extreme case. Yes, it could be a small probability. It's a non-zero probability.
Mm.
So your position in Bitcoin should also be non-zero.
And so you mentioned in there something about the reason you created Ledin was because you didn't want to sell your Bitcoin. And is that like the founding story? How did it come about? And can you just quickly explain what Ledin is? Because just for people that don't know.
Sure. So Ledin is a Bitcoin-backed lending company. And what we do is very simple. We can take your Bitcoin as collateral and give you $1 loan. So you don't have to sell your Bitcoin. The benefits of that is you get to keep the Bitcoin. If it goes up, it's still your Bitcoin. That appreciation all flows back to you. And the second one, in most places, selling Bitcoin for cash triggers a taxable event, whereas a loan typically does not. So with Ledin, you can come and borrow from us. It typically won't trigger a taxable event in your jurisdiction, and you get to keep the outside of the Bitcoin. And if you look at what Bitcoin price has done over the last 8 years since we've been in business, the people that have used their loans responsibly have benefited tremendously. Tremendously is an understatement. So that's what Ledin lets you do. How it came to be, I mentioned to you that I started mining with my family. When I was in Canada, I started mining with my best friend Adam Reeds from university. He was an energy expert, and I was mining for a while in Venezuela, so I needed cheap power, and he was great. And we started building our mine here and trying to get people excited about building more mines with us. And as we talked to other miners and other people in the space, we realized they all had the same issue. They were all selling Bitcoin to pay Bitmain to bring up more equipment. And there was a 1 year delay in the deliveries of Bitmain. So basically you have to let go of your Bitcoin and get the equipment a year from now. And in that year, Bitcoin would basically go to the moon and back to the moon. And you lost all of it. And after a few times doing that, you learn as a miner that you're best placed to keep the Bitcoin. So you go out looking for financing. And back today, Bitcoin backed loans, everybody thinks they're so smart and so great. And, we have all these banks saying, yeah, we want to do it. When we started, banks were laughing us out of the room. When we started asking for loans, they would tell us, Bitcoin's not an asset. Who would ever lend against that? Why are you guys doing this? That's ridiculous. And it was that inspired us even more, because we're like, these guys are so out for lunch on this. They do not see it. They do not see the potential. They don't understand what this thing does today. We did. And so we got excited because we figured we would have a head start on the banks on something for the first time ever in a financial product. And we did. We got an 8-year head start. And now a lot of them are trying to look at us and be like, ooh, how do we catch up to these guys? We processed $9 billion worth of loans. We just did $114 million worth of loans in January. So the business is growing because the product works. And so that's what Ledin does. Where it came from is A, this struggle with financing as a Bitcoin business, but B, as the Bolivar was getting depreciated into infinity, I saw a lot of people successfully short the Bolivar and use inflation for their benefit. And I loved that idea. And I did it in Venezuela. I tell people my best trade ever after Bitcoin was shorting the Bolivar. Long Bitcoin has now surpassed that. But my first greatest trade ever was shorting the Bolivar. And the way you short the Bolivar is you do it through a hard asset on the back to anchor the short. So you would go short Bolivares and you take that Bolivar loan and you borrow and you buy dollars with it. So basically you have dollar collateral and a Bolivar obligation. Your dollar collateral in Bolivar terms does this in hyperinflation. So the interest rate on my loans back then was 24%. I still remember. And inflation was running at like 4,000 or 5,000% a month. And so I would take these loans. And then 3 months later, I took $1,000 loans for argument's sake. I took a Bolivar loan, bought $1,000 worth of US dollars. In 2 months, my $1,000 Bolivar loan, I would really only have to sell $50 to get enough Bolivares to repay the entire loan, through which I bought 1,000. So basically, borrow Bolivares, buy $1,000, sell $50, repay loan. Pocket, $950. Rinse and repeat. Rinse and repeat. Rinse and repeat. Rinse and repeat. So the lesson here is that so long as you're borrowing below the actual rate of inflation, and you're anchoring this to an asset that is keeping up with the real rate of inflation, you're going to come out on top 10 times out of 10 times. So if you believe that inflation is 3% and that the Fed has an adequate Fed funds rate at 4%, yet everything you like goes up by 10% every year. Everything you like, your food, your cars, your houses, gold, Bitcoin, all desired assets go up by 10%. The S&P 500, the NASDAQ. Oh, but inflation is only 4%. Actually, inflation is only 3 and 4 is above. So the people that actually understand this, they look at this and they say, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. The Fed is subsidizing a 4% rate. The true rate of inflation is 8. Give me all the dollars that I can possibly borrow at 4 so that I can invest in the S&P 500 or in a house or anything that's going up by 8. And I get the delta, right? Inflation is roughly 10%. My dad used to always say this. No matter what anyone tells you, inflation is always 10%. At least. At least. So you're looking at these, and if you tack on COVID and things like that, inflation wasn't 10%. Inflation has been in the 20 to 30% range for the last little bit. So if you were borrowing at 10% and inflation was running at 30 to 25, 30%, you're making bank. So this is what people that understand debt and asset-backed debt do very well. And we saw in Bitcoin an opportunity to create a vehicle that would allow people to short the dollar. That is exactly what we do. We let you go short dollars and long Bitcoin. What you do with your short dollars is up to you. But you can use inflation for your own benefit if you use loans smartly.
And it's such a, like, I know so many people that have started to do this because it's becoming, I want to say, a real talking point now of, because people don't want to sell their Bitcoin. And like, if you need that capital, or if you want to use dollars, whatever it is, like, it's such a good way of doing it without selling, but also the tax events. That's a really interesting part, I think, for a lot of people.
That's it. I mean, the price is the best. If you look at the price chart, it'll show you that, if you manage the loan properly, holding Bitcoin for the long term is a great proposition. I think the aggregate rate of price appreciation for Bitcoin over the last, since inception, is somewhere in the 40% range. Our loans go out at 12%. Like, I'll give you an example. Last year, our clients took out 8 times, or our clients made 8 times more in the appreciation of their collateral than the interest they paid us. So it's almost a 10x on the appreciation they saw versus what they got, but what they had to pay on interest rate. Not to include, without including the optimization of not having that tax bill when you would have sold. So this is just like headline numbers. And at Ledin, Bitcoin is the collateral for your loan. So when Bitcoin price drops, you'll have to put on more Bitcoin to service the loan. And one of the risks that people that are considering these products need to be aware of is that there is liquidation risk. If the price drops and you're not able to service it and you didn't plan to service it, you could get liquidated. Now, mind you, these are extreme cases. Bitcoin has to move by a considerable amount in the way our loans are structured to even get you close to that risk, but it's something you should consider. But the flip side of that is that if Bitcoin goes up in your direction, Ledin allows you to scoop off excess Bitcoin from the loan. So last year, because of the price appreciation was very intense, our clients took out more than 1,000 Bitcoin back to self-custody from loans. So this is clients that basically took out loans when Bitcoin was at 20K, and they took out a $10,000 loan and they put 1 Bitcoin in. Now their loan is still $10,000, but Bitcoin, the collateral is worth $100,000. So now they can take off a considerable amount of Bitcoin off of that loan, back to self-custody, back to wherever they feel, to get another loan if they want. It's their Bitcoin. But the point is that it pays for you not to sell your Bitcoin if you choose the right platform. Now, the other thing, as you mentioned, that I want to just mention before we wrap up, but like, whenever we have these rallies, we get a bunch of new names and a bunch of new logos and a bunch of new people trying to seduce you to take a Bitcoin back loan with them and a product they launched 10 days ago or 13 days ago. The previous cycles in this industry have shown us that just because you raise a lot of money from big names in New York and you have a big sexy office in Jersey or whatever it is that you want to put it, and you have some big shot names and you're shaking hands with politicians and you're doing all these things, do not get carried away by names or logos or amounts or stadiums or sponsorships. Do your research. Time in the market beats timing the market every single time. I'm not trying to sell you Ledin. I know when you do your research, you're going to reach that conclusion yourself. But I want to invite you to do your research. There are less than a handful of companies. I would argue there's probably one or two that have been doing this for as long as we have, without any issues, with our clients basically being happy throughout, stem to stern, every single day. No issues with regulators, no issues with withdrawals, no converting anyone to this. You can't withdraw your assets. Now you have to become an investor in the company. None of that. You should always do your diligence when you're considering these platforms. That is what I leave you with. Ask about proof of reserves. Ask how long they've been in business. Ask how many clients they've serviced. Ask about registration, regulation. Who are they? Who has vetted them? What type of investors are backing them? Have these investors been in crappy projects before? Because there's lots of those. They don't stop trying. These guys, they keep trying. So you should know when you're assessing lending companies, look at the track record. That's all I'm going to say. Just the track record will teach you a lot more than the recent rounds or the recent stadium sponsorship. Just look at where they're coming from and who they are.
I'm very glad that you said that, because I was going to put that in for the audience as well. But you've said it perfectly. Like, you have to do research on this if this is something that you are considering. We'll wrap up there, because that has been nearly an hour. That has been amazing. Yeah, thank you very much for joining me. And for people, if they want to go and find Ledin, what is the website?
It's Ledin.io, Ledn.io. We're on X, Twitter, at Hodl with Ledin, and you can find me at Cryptonomist with an A at the end, Cryptonomista, on X or Twitter.
I'll put everything to you, like your profile and everything below, so people can just click on it. Nice and easy.
Awesome.
Awesome. Thanks for joining me.